Hey guys, welcome back. This is Unit 2.2, Energy and Matter Flows from Cells to Ecosystems. And we are continuing on with Part 3, Flow in an Ecosystem. Now, before we move on, remember, in our past two sections, we talked about photosynthesis and how that makes glucose for plants. And then we talked about cell respiration, which is how plant and animal cells use glucose in order to provide energy to the organism. Well, now we're going to talk about how that affects the larger ecosystem as a whole. All right, so this is part of what's called ecology, so let's start there. So ecology, what is it? Well, very simply put, it's the study of interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environment. So what that means is we look at how different organisms in the same area interact with each other, as well as how they interact with their habitats. As organisms change, evolve, or move from one place to another, they affect their environment and thus every other living thing in their environment. An important term for this chapter is biodiversity, which is the measure of variety of life within an area. So diversity means, variety and a lot of different options. Bio meaning life, so we're looking at the variety of life. Now, underneath my camera picture, we're gonna talk about the levels of ecological organization. So I do wanna at least point that out before we move on. So, levels of ecological organization focus on more so the levels of biological organization, but ones that are looking at from the organism onward. So we start off with an organism, which is just one single individual thing. And then we look at all of those same types of organisms living together. So a group of similar organisms living in the same area. Now that is a population. A group of populations living in one area, well, that's our community. All of the living, so in other words, the community plus the non-living factors that are in one area, that's our ecosystem. Biome is a group of similar ecosystems, and biosphere is a part of our planet where life exists. So in other words, all of the biomes together make up the biosphere. Let's take a look in terms of as a picture. So here we have our little individual fish. He's an organism. A group of the same type of fish is a population. The community is all the types of fish and seaweed and sea stars and the different kinds of corals that are living there. All of those make up the community. The ecosystem is the community plus the rocks, plus the water, plus the sunlight coming through. All of that makes up the ecosystem. Now, this is a coral reef habitat. It's a specific coral reef, though. So it is a specific ecosystem. But across all of the world, wherever there are coral reef ecosystems, all of them together make up the biome. And then all of the biomes across the entire planet make up the biosphere. All right. Did I miss? I think I started. So biotic, and you guys remember, hopefully you remember, biotic is all living or once living factors. So animals, plants, bacteria, bones, etc. So in this picture, the turtle, the fishies, the coral, yes, coral's alive, bacteria that's in the water, all of those are the biotic factors. Abiotic is all the non-living factors. So the rocks that the coral have attached to, the water, the dirt of the ocean floor, the sunlight coming through, all of that would be the abiotic factors. Okay, so I just put these out of order, that's all. Oh, the silly, silly Komar. I must have done ecology producers than that. Oh, the Komars, I know. So producers are also known as autotrophs. Now, auto means self, trophs means feeding. So these are self-feeders. What that means is that autotrophs are organisms that will make their own food using energy obtained by either the sun, thus doing photosynthesis, or by chemicals, thus doing chemosynthesis. These organisms can also be called producers because, well, they produce their own food. And what we mean by they produce their own food is that they make their own glucose. Remember, glucose is needed by the cells to provide energy. Some organisms make the glucose themselves, and that's what autotrophs or producers are. And again, they do this via either photosynthesis, if they get their energy source from their sun, or chemosynthesis, if their energy source is chemical bonds. Yep, definitely put that in the wrong place. All right. Consumers. Consumers, or heterotrophs, are organisms that rely on other organisms for their energy and food supply. So hetero means different, troph feeding. So they are organisms that feed on others or on different organisms. So they actually have to consume another organism, which is why they are also called consumers, because they have to eat other organisms. Now, notice it doesn't say just eat other animals like the lion is here, but plants are organisms too. So this koala bear eating the eucalyptus leaves, well, it's still eating another organism, so it's still consuming it. It is still a consumer. But there are different types of consumers, which is what we're going to discuss next. All right, so here are the main types of consumers. First one is herbivores. These are animals or consumers that feed on plants. So they're, like we saw in the previous picture with the koala, it consumes plants in order to get its energy. That is an example of an herbivore. Other ones include deer, giraffes, elephants, zebras, horses, etc. Let's see. Next, carnivores. Carnivores are organisms that feed on other animals, like we saw with the lion. So it gets its energy from the meat. Well, I shouldn't say meat, but from an actual other animal. So whether it is a lion eating a zebra, a hawk eating a mouse, a shark eating a fish. And we can also talk about insectivores, which are carnivores that eat insects. So different kinds of lizards might be insectivores. Insects are animals, so it is still considered to be a carnivore. Omnivore is an organism that feeds on both plants and animals, like our little raccoon buddy right here. Raccoons can eat plants and get energy from it. They can also eat other animals and get energy from them. We're also omnivores. We can get energy from both plants and animals. A lot of times kids will give the example of dogs for omnivores. It's not really entirely true. Dogs are carnivores. They get their energy from meat. Now, there's a difference between eating and getting energy from and just the ability to put something in your mouth and swallow it. Yes, dogs eat grass, but that's more so to calm their stomach. Yes, they can eat fruit. That's more so because they like the flavor. It doesn't mean that they're getting energy from it. I can put a penny in my mouth and I can eat it. Doesn't mean I get energy from the penny. I'm not a metallivore. So there's a difference between actually eating to get energy and just eating because, you know, why not? Let's see. Next one, detritivores. These are organisms that feed on organic remains. So, in other words, dead things. You can think of these as scavengers, like vultures or the earthworm here. They actually consume the dead matter. Yes, earthworms have a mouth, and they will open it up. They will consume the dead matter, just like how a vulture does, or a hyena. Similar to detritivores are decomposers. But with decomposers, instead of eating the dead organic remains, they break it down. So what happens is, like the case of this fungus on the fallen tree, what it's doing is it is chemically breaking down the tree. It does take longer to do than just eating, but it still works for them. So they kind of break down the tree and then absorb the nutrients into their cells directly. Now for detritivores, like the earthworm or a vulture, or actually any consumer, we eat it before we break it down. That's what the digestive process is. It's breaking down what we ate in order to get the nutrients that we then absorb into our bloodstream and cells. Well, decomposers are doing that without actually eating. They're doing, essentially what they're doing is digesting the tree on the outside and then just absorbing what they need from it. So detritivores and decomposers both do get energy from organic remains. Detritivores actually eat the remains, and decomposers chemically break them down and absorb the nutrients. All right, feeding relationships. So as we said, this entire unit is about how energy flows through ecosystems. And the thing about energy is that it only goes in one direction. So what that means is the energy is going to flow from the plant to the herbivore. It's not going to go from the herbivore back to the plant. We always start off when we talk about these in terms of the source of the energy, which is going to be sun or chemical compound. So whatever the producers are using as their source, energy source, in order to make glucose. So we talk a lot about terrestrial and sun-based ecosystems. So let's stick with that. Sun allows plants to do photosynthesis. That allows the plants to create glucose. A deer eats the plants and gets glucose, thus energy, from the plant. The wolf eats the deer, allowing the wolf to get glucose and thus energy from the deer. So the energy goes from the sun to the plant, from the plant to the deer, from the deer to the wolf. And if you want to take that even a step farther, the wolf eventually dies, and it'll go from the wolf to the decomposers. Now, I know some people are probably saying, but Ms. Komar, Lion King talked about the circle of life, and you know, we decompose and then we become the grass, and then the antelope eat the grass. Yes and no. When organisms decompose, they are broken down into, different components, which might include nutrients. However, those nutrients do not include glucose. When we talk about energy flow, we're talking about the flow of glucose, because glucose powers our cells and provides energy to our cells. Now, a lot of the nutrients that are returned to the soil after an organism decomposes are ones that can be used for building tissues or proteins or anything like that, but it's not the glucose. All right, we are going to talk about food chains versus food webs. Food chain is simply looking at one path of energy versus food webs, which is looking at multiple paths. And in each case, we can talk about something called trophic levels. Now, these are just simply the steps the individual, portions of the food chain and food web. Producers will always, 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 always make up the first level of a trophic level. And then consumers are always the higher levels. So it starts off with the producers as first trophic level. Then the deer would be the second trophic level because it eats the grass. And then the wolf would be the third trophic level because it eats the deer, which is at the second trophic level. And each consumer depends on the level below it for energy. So what that means is that it depends on its food source for energy. So food chain is a series of steps in which an organism transfers energy by eating and being eaten, such as this. It's very, very straightforward. It's one single pathway. Now notice the arrows are showing the direction that energy is moving. So sunlight helps the producers to create glucose. The grass is eaten by the grasshopper. So we're saying that the glucose from the grass goes to the grasshopper, which allows the grasshopper to use the glucose to make energy. So therefore, energy goes from the grass to the grasshopper. Grasshopper gets eaten by the frog gets energy from it. Frog gets eaten by the snake gets energy from the frog. The snake gets eaten by the hawk gets energy from the snake. The hawk eventually dies, decomposes, the fungus and other decomposers get energy from the hawk. Now this would be first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, fourth trophic level, fifth trophic level, and sixth trophic level. We can also talk about the different levels in terms of producers and consumers. The first trophic level we said is always producers, and then we start counting off the levels of consumers after that. So producers, primary consumer, meaning first consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and quaternary consumer. A lot of times they won't necessarily count the fungus as a true consumer, just in terms of the different levels, because whatever's left of the grasshopper, if it's not eaten all the way, also gets decomposed. Same with the frog, same with the snake. All right, a food web is a network of complex relationships that links all food chains in an ecosystem together. So in other words, instead of just looking at one possible pathway or path that energy can flow through, it's looking at all the possible pathways that energy can flow in an ecosystem. And a lot of these are, so pretty much what we're looking at is interconnected food chains. So it's looking at all the possible food chains and how they interconnect, they overlap within an ecosystem. Like this. Obviously, this is pretty intense, isn't it? So the sun powers up the producers, allows them to make energy. So bamboo gets eaten by the panda, which can get eaten by the snow leopard, which can get shot by the man. I'm actually going to ignore the human in this context. The bamboo can get eaten by the panda again, but the panda this time can get eaten by the jackal. The jackal can then get eaten by the snow leopard. The bamboo can also get eaten by the grasshopper, which can get eaten by the vulture. Let's see. The bamboo can get eaten by the red panda, which can be eaten by the snow leopard, or bamboo can be eaten by the red panda, which can then be eaten by the jackal, which can then be eaten by the snow leopard. Bamboo can be eaten by the gorilla, which might be eaten by a snow leopard. Bamboo can be eaten by the bamboo rat, which can be eaten by the jackal, which can be eaten by the snow leopard. Bamboo can be eaten by the bamboo rat, which can be eaten by the snake, which can be eaten by the vulture. So much going on. All right, we're done with the bamboo. Let's move on to the ferns. Ferns can get eaten by the grasshopper, which can get eaten by the vulture. Ferns can also be eaten by the snail, which can be eaten by the snake, which can be eaten by the vulture. Yeah. All right. Grass can be eaten by the snail, which can be eaten by the vulture. And let's see. Grass can be eaten by the snail, which can be eaten by the snake, which can be eaten by the vulture. Grass can be eaten by the gorilla, which can be eaten by the snow leopard. Grass can be eaten by the frog, which can be eaten by the vulture. Grass can be eaten by the bamboo rat, which can be eaten by the snake, which can be eaten by the vulture. Grass can be eaten by the bamboo rat, which can be eaten by the which can be eaten by the jackal, which can be eaten by the snow leopard. And all of these, when whatever remains are left over when they die, will be broken down by the decomposers. Alrighty. Whew. You can see how they're all a lot more interconnected. So here we have it just source of energy going in one direction versus all possible pathways that interconnect, intertwine, overlap. Very, 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 very busy. All right. Talk about the energy pyramid. Now, this is just kind of taking the idea of trophic levels and putting it into a pyramid shape to allow us to see how things are transferred from one step of the pyramid to the next. And the reason why we call it the energy pyramid is because we can look at how much energy is actually being passed on from one trophic level to the next trophic level, which we found is only about 10%. So 10% of the energy moves between the trophic levels. 90% of the energy is kept by the organism to do its regular, life functions, its metabolic processes, run its own reactions, power its own cells. Only 10% gets transferred to the next organism. So here we show leaves can get eaten by insect larvae, can get eaten by the bonobo, which can get eaten by the crocodile. Now first we have first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, fourth trophic level. You can also think about this in terms of producers versus consumers. So producers, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Now in terms of energy, remember we said only 10% is passed on. The leaves start with 100% because they are the ones that make the glucose in the first place. So 10% of 100 is 10%. So the insect larvae only get 10% of the energy from the rainforest leaves. Well, the bonobo only gets 10% of the energy that the insect larva has, which is 1% of the total energy. The crocodile only gets 10% of what the bonobo has, which is 0.1% of the total energy. So we can see how the amount of energy decreases as it goes up. But not only that, also biomass decreases as you go up the energy pyramid. And we just simply call this version the biomass pyramid. So the amount of living tissue within a given trophic level, that's what we mean by biomass. So in other words, we're looking at the amount of actual biological tissue. Now, because we're looking at biological tissue or the tissue of the different organisms, that does mean that it represents the amount of potential food for the next trophic level. And what we've noticed is that it decreases as you go up, which kind of makes sense, and I'll explain why when we look at the picture. So here we're just showing 3 trophic levels. The widest at the base would be the plants, because you need more plant biomass, more producer biomass to support everything above it. If you had more giraffes in terms of biomass than the plants, then that means that there's not enough food to support the larger biomass of the giraffes. So it'd be like a small base and then a large top. Well, that means that these giraffes are going to eat all of the food. Well, when they eat all of the plant life, then that means that there's no more plant life, which now the giraffes are going to starve. And since the giraffes are going to starve, that means the lions are going to starve. On a similar note, if we had more biomass of the lions than we do of the giraffes, then that means that to feed all those lions, they're going to have to eat all the giraffes, which means the giraffes are going to die out, which means now the lions are going to starve. And now the plants can kind of grow just all over the place. So that's what we were talking about in terms of biomass. All right, so additional resources. We have Science in Pajamas looking at the levels of ecological organization. We have autotrophs versus heterotrophs. We have food chain versus food web. And we have energy pyramid. Alrighty. Now, in terms of other videos, we have Khan Academy Ecology Introduction. We have Bozeman Science Energy Flow in Ecosystems. We have Fuse School Food Chains and Food Webs. We have Fuse School Ecological Pyramids. We have Amoeba Sisters Food Webs and Energy Pyramids. We have Amoeba Sisters Autotrophs and Heterotrophs. And we have Khan Academy Impacts of Changes to Trophic Levels. All right. I definitely recommend you checking some of those out. They'll help to kind of clarify, provide extra explanations and all that. I'll fix the order of these circles here to make sure everything goes in the correct direction and the correct order. But in the meantime, I'll put the link for this presentation into the video description so that you have access to the additional resources. In the meantime, you guys, stay awesome, stay safe, and I will see you next time. All right, guys, take care. Bye-bye.